The Arabian Deserts. In the mind of humanity, they are the cradle of the heavenly religions. In the great memory of humankind, they embody nobility and beauty. In a place like this in the Sinai Desert, and for only one time in human history, the Almighty God spoke with one of His human beings, Moses. And not far from this place, the Virgin Mary received the divine annunciation of the birth of Jesus, whose apostles and disciples later spread from the edges of the desert across the world. Then, on one of the mountains of Hijaz, God's revelation of the message of Islam was conveyed by Gabriel to another man, Prophet Muhammad. For thousands of years, all humans, believers and non-believers alike, glorified these lights that brightly gleamed in the Arabian deserts. In the Arabian deserts, many civilizations were born. On their edges, seeds of human progress grew and flourished. Alphabets of languages we still speak today emerged, and ever fascinating monuments erected. This is the desert, a spiritual treasure for man, a breathing space for the earth, and an optimal integration of unique ecosystems. In the desert, man comprehends the grandeur of the universe and the magnificence of the succession of day and night. In the Arabian deserts, prophets were prepared to receive their divine revelation. Spiritually overwhelmed by the magnificence and serenity of the deserts, they led nations and established civilizations. In the desert, man feels peace of mind in what looks like the absence of time. And in the desert serenity, man discovers his spiritual dimensions and sublimes as humanity has sublimed. Throughout history, the peoples of the Arabian deserts have adapted socio-economic systems compatible with their ecosystems, waters, and rangelands. The lifestyle of human communities in these areas was nomadic and semi-nomadic, in search of pasture and water. This Bedouin lifestyle induced a set of values focusing on generosity and love of freedom. The nomad Bedouins inherited a means of coexistence with steppes and deserts and established an environment-friendly system based on the principles of sustainability and self-sufficiency, which provides food, clothing, housing, and transport. In the Arabian deserts, man raised camels, which were his ship of the desert. He raised sheep for his food and as a symbol of donation and redemption. He also raised horses, his symbol of pride, linking their pedigree with his own. And they all lived together in an atmosphere of full environmental harmony and integration that did not exclude other animals and wild birds. That harmony has radiated a sense of serenity and infinity and displayed manifestations of beauty. Date palms are grown in the oases and on the edges of the Arabian deserts. Nowadays, they produce about 70% of the best date fruits in the world, such as Deglet Noor, Rothana, and other varieties. It is the date palm, a blessed tree in the Arab region, the queen of oases, a shelter for shade and a source of goodness and bounty. Despite the dominant arid climate and the scarcity of rainfall, large underground water basins exist in the Arab deserts. Famous for good water, these wells are still spread across deserts. Since ancient times, poets have eulogized the rich oases, date palm gardens and clusters of dates. Al-Azraq oasis in Jordan used to provide distant Amman with water. Nowadays, many Arab towns and cities still largely depend on desert water to meet their basic needs. Many new agricultural projects flourished thanks to desert water. They are now scattered in many Arab countries like Libya, Egypt, Tunisia, Jordan, Syria, the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and others. In recent years, the Arab deserts have been blessed by the discovery of huge natural resources. The discovery of oil and other precious metals has drastically affected the region's socio-economic development and has also brought about major changes worldwide. Small towns and settlements have become modern cities. Colossal cities have been established, serving as a real evidence of the richness and generosity of the Arabian deserts. Just as do the ruins of pharaoh civilizations which still adorn the desert near Cairo, or the ruins of the kingdom of Palmyra oasis which are still standing as an amulet against the ghosts of extinction. And here is Petra, the rosy city, as it emerges from mountains still towering in the desert, a beauty spot on the cheek of time. Close by extends the Rum Valley, or the Valley of the Moon, with its moon-shaped elevations. The Arabian deserts are visited nowadays by tourists who find in them the joy of tranquility and infinity, a joy that was lost in the midst of modern civilization and its dilemmas. The desert consists of different types of sands that cover its surface or form dunes whose shapes differ according to the direction of winds that blow across the desert. 38 names are used by the Arabs to denote different shapes of dunes. There are deserts with moving sands, deserts famous for their chains of bare dunes, or dunes with sands fixed by natural plants. There are also some deserts covered with large and small volcanic stones or black gravel. There are steppes or badia, which are still fertile rangelands for camels, goats, and sheep. It is the desert, a unique planet granted by God to Mother Earth, the planet of man. A beautiful planet, but sometimes violent and rapidly enraged. When storms blow and sands cover the roads, man has to stop and retreat. Sandstorms carry desert sands to distant cities and towns. Sand encroachment on productive oases and community centers is one of the factors of desertification. It threatens vast areas of agricultural lands and oases, and in some instances, populated areas, forcing their evacuation when invaded by these sands. There are two facets of the deserts. One is charming, and the other dusty and grim. But both differ from what we nowadays call desertification. While the desert is a natural environmental ecosystem developed over many thousands of years, desertification is a man-made environmental problem exacerbated by climate change and other natural factors. Desertification occurs in productive lands, even in those located far away from deserts, gradually diminishing their agricultural productivity and eventually turning them into barren lands. Exacerbated by human-driven ecological disturbances, desertification threatens today 1/3 of the globe and more than 1 billion people. In the Arab world today, the problem of desertification threatens the region's development progress and security. It threatens its food, financial, economic, and social security. In the Arab region, the size and consequences of desertification are immense and significant because about 90% of the Arab lands are arid, either deserts or steppes. Furthermore, the accelerated rate of desertification is associated with the increased pressure on natural resources. Ever since the onset of the Arab demographic explosion, man became a threat to the environment after coexisting with it in peace and harmony for thousands of years. The surge in the number and needs of the population, the development of new means for exploiting land, and the extreme unprecedented random urbanization are factors that led to overexploitation of land resources. This has in turn compromised the ecological balances and the ability of the environmental systems to replenish their resources, causing degradation and bringing devastation. Grazing in the deserts used to be sustainable, but it gradually turned into overgrazing, causing deterioration and degradation of the rangelands. Overcutting of shrubs has also contributed to the magnitude of these problems, exposing soil to the dangers of water and wind erosion. Natural rangeland areas in the Arab world have shrunk and their productivity decreased, while the number of herds and cattle is still growing constantly. The introduction of new unstable cultivars at the expense of natural grazing lands and the use of agricultural equipment unsuitable for the soil of fragile areas have led to the destruction of the soil structure, exposing it to various types of erosion. Water use is another important issue. Overexploitation of the groundwater resources contributes to the spread of desertification in a serious way. We see here how the wells have become dry and full of sand instead of water, and how this oasis deteriorated. Trunks of palm trees have bent to express the tragedy of aridity. It is an exclamation of an oasis that died, a life that ended. Despite the depletion of the groundwater reservoirs, some people continue to irrigate crops with 5 or 6 times the actual need. The inadequate practices in transporting water and irrigation continue to cause the loss and seepage of large quantities of water, which in the absence of effective drainage systems cause waterlogging and soil salinization. The loss of wildlife is another sign of desertification. Only very few desert animals survived extinction, like these sad examples in the zoo of Tozeur in Tunisia, or these freely roaming ostrich and gazelles and oryx in the desert reserve of Dubai, the Syrian Talila Reserve, or the Shomari Reserve, and the Steppe Ecological Center in the Jordanian Northern Steppe. Aware of the danger of desertification, the Arab countries have recently intensified scientific research on deserts and desertification. This is an advanced research station in the Sinai Desert. Plants, trees, and shrubs are tested here for suitability for the desert environment. The station has a herbarium and a desert plants gene bank. This is a nursery of desert plants in Tunisia. And here we see how Libyan experts in combating desertification are working to study water runoff on desert lands and how it became possible to rehabilitate the rangelands within these protected areas. Here is a Syrian grazing plant seedlings center. Seedlings are planted over vast degraded steppe areas. Large areas of Jabal al-Bishri in northeast Syria have been exposed to desertification, but were rehabilitated. They are again fertile rangelands. At this site of the Jordanian desert, rainwater is harvested for the development of the rangelands. In the United Arab Emirates, scientifically based efforts are going on to ensure the safety and sustainability of the desert environment. Pilot farms and date palm plantations are also encouraged. Support is given to the intensified breeding of camels so as to recover the economic importance of this unique and useful animal. Saudi Arabia is taking several measures to multiply desert plants and shrubs, to rehabilitate the deteriorated areas and to sustain the diverse desert resources and areas of acacia and other desert plants spread in Saudi Arabia. National plans to combat desertification are currently implemented by all Arab countries. Measures are taken to alleviate the adverse impacts of desertification, to protect areas exposed to sand encroachment, to fix sand dunes and protect desert water basins. Fixing sand dunes is a costly and hard process, but it is necessary, especially in dunes surrounding important oases, settlements and natural reserves. Dunes are fixed via natural biological means. Plants suitable for sand dunes are planted here. Other plants, trees and shrubs are grown as a second defense line behind fixed dunes to protect oases and other areas against sand invasion. Another mechanical way is based on inserting palm fronds on top of the dune to serve as a front line to hinder wind. In other areas, sand traps made of palm fronds or other artificial materials are placed in the form of lines, squares or other shapes identified according to prior studies. In the water sector, the Arab countries are working to utilize desert floodwater to dig reservoirs and build structures for water harvesting. This is the reservoir of Al-Buqay'awiyya in northern Jordan. And these are some of the reservoirs of Jabal al-Bishri in Syria. This is the reservoir of King Abdulaziz in Saudi Arabia, built close to another historical one, which has existed since the Abbasid period. The local population is benefiting from both reservoirs, especially during the summer, dry months. In Tunisia, these perforated pipes are used to pour surface water torrents into desert ground basins. Here in Libya, we see how wind energy is harnessed to extract water from the rehabilitated desert wells. All the Arab countries benefit on a large scale from rainwater in implementing greenbelt projects in the marginal areas adjacent to the steppes or deserts, and this means surrounding the exposed areas with a wide green fence made of various kinds of adapted trees. Rainwater harvesting techniques are also applied in many areas of the Arab world where rainfall is spread to cultivate selective areas with appropriate pastoral plants. In this way, wide areas were rehabilitated. Even airplanes have been used at some Libyan sites to spread pastoral seeds. Other techniques include constructing terraces on slopes to prevent soil erosion. On the other hand, many Arabian deserts have witnessed the implementation of many big, medium and small-sized projects. Sophisticated irrigation systems are used. Wheat and barley are cultivated. Sheep, cows and camels are bred. Such desert projects have certainly enlarged the green areas and increased grain and meat production. But they also changed many social, economic, and even prevailing environmental conditions. The nomad Bedouins who lived in tents or fragile abodes live now in residential communities. They work in agriculture or in cattle breeding. In addition, modern and protected agriculture no longer looks strange to some Bedouins in their private projects. However, other Bedouins still love the liberty of the steppe and the generosity of the desert. They carry on with their nomadic life and many of their pastoral habits. Though proud to live in tents, some of them move in luxurious cars, transport sheep in huge lorries and water in modern tankers. What is going on now is actually a rearrangement of the old house and a readaptation of the inherited values under new environmental rules and conditions, which have some positive aspects, but generally are not free from deficiencies. Therefore, there is a need to devise appropriate measures to ensure sustainable exploitation of the natural resources under new rules. More scientific research is needed in this regard. For this reason, the Arab Center for Studies of Arid Zones and Dry Lands, ACSAD, has been working for several years on the establishment of a regional early warning system, a desertification monitoring and assessment strategy, and to standardize measures and methods of applying the techniques of remote sensing and the geographical information systems. Through the successful implementation of the project on monitoring and assessing desertification at Jabal al-Bishri in Syria, it was possible to formulate a national project to disseminate techniques for combating desertification in some Arab-affected areas. ACSAD is the specialized Arab organization appointed by the Arab League to protect the ecological system in the Arabian deserts and combat desertification. In carrying this task, ACSAD cooperates with Arab countries to set up their own national plans to combat desertification. Protection of desert ecological systems and combating land degradation are of central concern and attention of the United Nations Environmental Programme UNEP and Arab Center for Studies of Arid Zones and Dry Lands, ACSAD. Both organizations cooperate with UNESCO and other partners in the region to activate efforts towards this goal. UNEP, being the guardian of global environment, has established a strategic partnership with the Council of Arab Ministers responsible for the environment of the League of Arab States to address these issues, among other environmental issues in the region, in the context of sustainable development. Desertification is a worldwide concern. It can only be resolved through a global partnership. The United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, UNCCD, signed by the majority of the countries of the world, has called for the necessity to combat desertification and alleviate the impact of drought through international cooperation and partnership agreements. This also was the call of the Damascus Declaration launched by the Arab Ministries of Agriculture, participating in the 2006 ACSAD General Assembly. During a press conference, the ministries have assured that Damascus Declaration is intended for taking decisions and putting together the necessary means to face the threats of desertification. The entire international community is invited today to make concentrated efforts to combat desertification, to rehabilitate and preserve the natural ecosystems at the global level. It is a struggle that we may lose some of its early battles, but one that we should continue together, so that human environment may win. There are today technical solutions to face the spread of desertification and rehabilitate the affected areas. However, putting these solutions into practice requires the provision of further and sustainable support for the concerned specialized Arab and UN organization. Amidst bare dunes and a lush oasis, this Bedouin sways as he beats his drum. His tunes seem to be reiterating the melancholy question: where would humanity be heading if it continues to overlook the dangers of desertification and to do little about it? The desert tunes, a call for awareness and caution. Desertification is dangerous, so may humanity beware.